So welcome back, and today we're going to start our next unit on Alexander Hamilton, who you've heard of probably through the show, and now we're going to get some history background on Hamilton and Hamilton's link to New York City, and at some point look at the videos of the show Hamilton. But I thought to get us started today, I asked Narissa and Saima to introduce this next section and kind of set the stage for us in terms of what is so interesting and why we're about to launch into this most important part of New York's history. So I'll turn it over to Saima and Narissa for a brief introduction.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So, as we heard a wonderful lecture from last class from our professor about the American Revolution, we learned how important New York City was to this war, which I had no clue about. We came to find out that New York City was severely ruined by the war. Not only was the city destroyed, but it was the most destroyed city from the war. Thousands of people had died, there were abandoned buildings, there were ashes everywhere, and New York City was basically turned to dust. And it was so severely damaged that to this day, there is no such thing as colonial tours or sites, no type of colonial history left in New York City. Yeah, that's pretty much it, Narissa.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. And Narissa, you want to add to that?
Sure. So there at the end of the American Revolution, New York City was left as this little, small, depopulated town. And as Saima mentioned, no other city in America has ever experienced this type of destruction before. But in the next half century, New York becomes the most important state in all of America. So what we will learn today is how did New York get to become the most important state in all of America, and why did that happen, and what happened to cause that, and who were the key players in the remaking of the city.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you. And so I just want to emphasize, because it's chilling, that we have nothing left of our colonial history because it was all destroyed. It's amazing. You go to any other city, you go to Philadelphia, Boston, Baltimore, and they take you on these tours. There are no tours. There's nothing here. I mean, it all gets burned. So that always gets me, even hearing it now, just sort of as a historian. At one point in my career, I wanted to do a film about colonial New York. I think I did the research, spent a few months, and I think I found 6 buildings, and they were just like warehouses. And it was wasn't even the building, it was like a wall of one of the buildings. So it's an amazing thing when you think about it. And let me just emphasize, for those of you writing down, what I've been emphasizing since the beginning of this class is that, and something that Narissa said at the end of her statement, how, why, what, who. All right, we know when we're talking about. This is right after the revolution. But how did it happen that New York rises out of the ashes, somewhat like Phoenix? Is Atta here yet? He's a poet. So hi, Arbaz. I just saw your name pop up.
Hey, Professor, how you doing?
Nice to see you. I see your name, but can I get a quick look?
Oh, I'll make sure to send you the picture. I forgot. I apologize.
Can I get a quick look at you?
Oh, no, I only have a headset, no webcam. I apologize.
Okay, so send me a picture of you, so I'll put it up.
No problem.
So what I'm saying is that we're going to answer these following questions, as I've been emphasizing since the first day of the class, of how did New York City become the most important city in the Western Hemisphere, coming out of nothing, coming out of being a burned out city in 1783 with 5,000 people, a depopulated small town. How'd that happen? Why did it happen? I mean, there's a difference between how something happens and why something happened. Can anybody give me an example of something in their life, like this week or yesterday, sort of like telling us how something happened to you and then why it happened? Can somebody give me a personal, not very personal, but some example of something in your life, and just tell me, how it happened, and then go to why it happened, right? Does anybody want to do that? Arbaz, you want to give it a shot?
Sure. Could you repeat the question, Professor?
I'm trying to get an understanding of the difference between how, why, what, and who. You know, when is obvious. It happened yesterday, but can you give me us a little story about your own life, not too personal, yesterday, the day before, maybe the weekend, of something that happened, and break it into sort of what happened, why it happened, how it happened, and who was involved, just so we get a sense of these questions before we move on to looking at it in terms of the bigger question of New York City, you know, rising out of the ashes. Give me something about your own life.
Let me think. Let me think. I got pulled over on Saturday night for
All right.
speeding.
Perfect,
So
perfect.
let's see. The who was
So,
me.
wait a minute. So what happened is you got pulled over for speeding on, and when it happened was Saturday night. So we got two of the questions answered. Go
Yep.
ahead.
Let me see.
Who
Who
was
was
involved?
there? It was me. It was an older friend of mine's. He came from LA. He's visiting for the weekend. So I was just taking him around. And the officer. So I guess those were the three people in play.
And how did it happen that you got caught? How did it happen? I mean, all of us have gone over the speed limit every now and then, but how did it happen that you got caught?
Oh, so I was going from Jersey back to New York because we had a friend in Jersey as well, so we went to go see him. So on the way back, I was doing, I believe he put me down for 88 and a 65. I thought that was like bullshit, but I mean, hey, what can you do? So yeah, he just pulled me over, said, "Hey, do you know how fast you're going?" I said, "Nope, no clue," you know. So
What was the speed limit?
I think the speed limit was either 60 or 65, one of those.
You were doing what? You thought you were doing 75?
Yeah, and then he said 88.
So you were doing, according to him, 23 miles an hour above the speed limit. And according to you, you were doing 15 miles an hour, right?
Approximately, yep.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And okay, here's the big question. And we don't have the officer here, so we're just gonna ask you, why did it happen? Why do you think it happened?
Why did it happen? Let's see.
Yeah.
Well,
And let me just say, I felt the pause. You felt, and I hope everybody else felt the pause. That is the most difficult part in terms of history. Why did something happen? And we don't have the police officer here. We have you here, so we're going to get why according to Arbaz. Go ahead.
well, I guess it maybe the question of why could be perspective. So for example, you could say why it happened. I could say that's it happened because New York cops are snakes. That could be one example. Another person could say the reason why it happened was I was going too fast. I was just trying to get home quicker, I guess. So I mean, I think perspective definitely plays a factor in answering the why, because maybe one person might have a difference of opinion as to why something may have occurred.
Perfect, 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 perfect. So in this person, thank you, Arbaz. Thank you so much. So in this personal example, what I'm trying to reinforce here in your writing is for you to address these basic 5 Ws, which you should take with you to all your other classes and everything you write. Always, when you finish doing the writing, whether it's a paragraph or a page, look back and say, okay, did I answer the 5 Ws? You know, how did it happen? When, who, why, what? Okay. And so I'm just reviewing that because it's such a crucial part of the class. And today, what I'm going to be doing is giving some brief remarks. And for those of you who take notes, which I wish most of you do, it's flattering to me, about the rise of New York out of this ashes, the phoenix rising out of the ashes of New York City, and also the rise of the nation. And why did it happen? And I'm going to address why did it happen. I'm going to address who was involved, where it happened, and when. We've already got that down. And leave it to you in your writing to really talk about why. I'll say a few words about why. So here's some background on this topic. After, hello? Someone have a question? I thought I heard a noise. Okay. So after the war is over, Alexander Hamilton, who was George Washington's aide de camp, he was like his main man. I mean, Hamilton is like the major aide to George Washington. They're close friends. He goes to battle with Washington. Washington relies on Hamilton for strategy. I think it was Christian who asked who was Lafayette. Christian, was that you who asked who was Lafayette? Hello, Christian, are you there? Are you muted? Hello, hello.
It was me.
Was it you?
Yes, it was me.
Hey, did you ever look it up? I asked you to Google. Did you ever look it up? Who was Lafayette in terms of the turning point of the war and saying Lafayette comes in and helps Washington? Did you look it up or not? Okay, so anyway, that's okay. So Washington relies on Hamilton also in terms of Hamilton's good friends with Lafayette. Lafayette was this wealthy French nobleman who comes into the cause of the revolution for liberty and fraternity and equality. And Washington's connection to Lafayette is through Hamilton. And Hamilton is really key in bringing Lafayette into the war and thus turning the whole war around. So Hamilton's a crucial ally to George Washington. At the end of the war, Hamilton and Washington tour what was once the colonies, now the independent, continental United States, and they spend time buying land. They roam the 13 colonies buying land. Washington had a lot of money. Washington's wife, Martha, had even more money. Hamilton wanted to have money. Hamilton married one of the daughters of Schuyler, so Hamilton's wife had a lot of money. And so they are buddies. They're roaming around after the war, buying up land, and talking about the new nation and what would it be like. And it's decided, and I think, who was it? Louis, was it you who asked the question about empire and the Empire State? Who was it who asked that question in the last class? Louis, was that you or Brian? Who asked the question, or Jason, who asked the question about this reference to the Empire State in our last class? Does anybody remember my answer? More importantly, does anybody remember what I said? Who's muted, Narissa? Louis, are you there?
Professor, I was going to say, I think you said that it was mentioned in the letter, the empire. The reference to the empire was mentioned in the letter between Hamilton and Washington.
Perfect. Thank you, Narissa. It's such a funny moment as a professor, right? I'm here in this room and then everything goes quiet. So I'm really glad that you came through for me. It's mentioned in a letter between Hamilton and Washington. And part of what they're talking about and part of the decision that's going to be made is what kind of government we'll have and what will be the plan. And as I said in the last class, Hamilton is encouraging Washington to become king and to create this as the empire of the new America. And he writes him this note that says, it should be the empire, and the heart of the empire should be New York. And he convinces Washington to put the capital of the country temporarily in the beginning when the Continental Congress meets. He convinces Washington that the new Continental Congress should meet in New York City, and New York City should be the original capital. Okay, maybe temporary, it'll get decided, but New York City should be the capital, the center, as he puts it in the center of the empire, and thus all of our license plates still have that, or did the governor change that? But we're called the Empire State coming out of this discussion between Hamilton and Washington. So for those of us who like to put down a date, 1785 is a good date to put down. 2 years after the revolution's over. The revolution was settled in 1783. The English signed, the Treaty of Paris is signed that ends the revolution. And in 1785, the Continental Congress meets in New York City. Nobody knows this. I don't know why nobody knows this, but you should write it down. The Continental Congress, the first meeting of government of the new country, meets on Wall Street, in New York City, in Manhattan, and right next door to where Hamilton's living right next door, right? And so it put a star next to this, the capital of the new country, the capital of the new country, the capital of this United States. The first capital was right here in New York. I just love saying that. I mean, it's so important. And April 30th, if you really want to get to April 30th in 1789, George Washington was inaugurated as the first president of the country right in New York City 231 years ago in April. Nobody knows this. I mean, I'll say it again. It's so interesting and important. George Washington is sworn in as President of the United States on Wall Street in New York City in April of 1789. Anybody have a reaction to that? Did anybody know that before this class?
I did not know that.
You didn't know that?
I also didn't know about the Empire State thing. Like, I always wondered why we called it that. But I didn't know. And I, for some reason, I don't know why I thought George Washington was sworn in DC. Is that where they usually do it?
Yeah. The reason you thought that Washington was sworn in DC is because most of us look at history from today back. And so in your lifetime, you've always seen presidents sworn in Washington, D.C. So it was logical for you to say, oh, they've all been sworn in Washington, D.C. But what's that?
But was it only George Washington that was sworn in a different place, or were other presidents also sworn in different places?
It was only George Washington who was sworn in New York City as the first president of the United States.
I need to write that.
After that, the capital moves and moves and moves until it gets to Washington, D.C. And so the next president is sworn in Philadelphia, because Philadelphia, they keep moving the capital. But the first president, which I love to say, the first president of the United States was George Washington. Everybody knows that name. And George Washington was sworn in as president in New York City in 1789. Anybody else have a reaction to that? Anybody else kind of have a feeling towards that of sort of why you never knew that?
I'm guessing that we never knew about that due to the fact that there's so much history to be covered within a small period of time.
That's a good point. Does anybody have the feeling that there's a prejudice against New York, and that the whole history of New York is kind of not really told in any real way? And I've always felt like New York's never been given its glory. I don't know why I've always felt that way, but it seems like New York is always sort of like it's not emphasized enough. But that's my personal opinion. Anyway, so the first Congress meets in New York. The Secretary of State is Thomas Jefferson, and the Secretary of the Treasury is Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton in 1789 is 33 years old. He's 33 years old, and he's the first Secretary of the Treasury. And Oleg, can you put the questions up so we can take a quick look at the questions? All right, can you make question 1 bigger? Because that's the question I'm going to talk about right now. Can you make that bigger, or is that the largest it can be? Does everybody have a copy of these questions, by the way? Did anybody not get these questions? because I revised them about an hour before the class. So does everybody have a copy?
Yes, Professor.
You do? Anybody not have a copy of these questions? What's that?
Professor G, what year was George Washington sworn in, you said?
It was sworn in 1789. April 30th, 1789. The anniversary is coming up, Carmela. You better organize your friends to really have a George Washington gathering.
I would really love to.
Yeah, safe distancing with masks, please. All right, you see the first question, what was Alexander Hamilton's vision for the economy and for the nation? All right, I'm going to tell you the answer, and you write down in any way you can, and then we're going to watch a quick video about this also. So Oleg, we can go back now to, we can get rid of the share screen. Okay, Hamilton's plan was to build a national economy and to build it not based on slavery, but to build the United States not on slavery, but on banking, on manufacturing, and on immigrant labor. And Hamilton argued that would be the future of our country, and that would be the future of New York. And think back to a class we had where we talked about the Dutch and Stuyvesant and the regulation of paying the Native Americans. Can anybody make a connection? Can anybody make a connection to that class and what Hamilton had in mind in terms of he wanted to build the country based on banking, manufacturing, and immigrant labor, and not on slavery? Who wants to try that one? Go back to that other class we had when we talked about the Dutch wanting to pay the Native Americans for their labor. Brian, you want to give that a shot?
What was the question?
The question is, Hamilton basically, his plan as Secretary of the Treasury, build a national economy not based on slave labor, but based on commerce, based on manufacturing. And I'm saying, I've already talked about this kind of logic when we talked about the Dutch and putting in and Stuyvesant saying that they should pay the Native Americans a fair wage. And what did I get at in that class, which Hamilton is getting at here as well? Do you remember?
To be honest, I don't remember.
Remember? Anybody have any memory of that? Anybody? Jason? Jason, you there? Luis, are you there? Luis?
Yeah.
You have any memory of that argument that I was making in that class a few weeks ago about the importance of a wage labor rather than slavery? Do you remember anything from that?
No, I don't really.
All right, anybody before I give you the answer? Anyone want to try it?
Was it the one where we were talking about how they signed a contract and they basically weren't enslaved necessarily, but he would have to work throughout that contract and then they would be free?
That was the indentured. Yeah, that was the difference between being indentured and being a slave labor. But the key here, and what you should all write down, and what Hamilton was arguing for, was that slaves don't get a wage. And he was saying, let's build an economy, let's build a country, let's build this nation on wage labor. And it will be from wage labor that you can then develop manufacturing and industry and banking. You can't do it unless you have a wage earning group that has money in their pocket. Why? Now I'll turn to you to sort of look at the why of that, and why is that so important in your mind?
Does it have something to do with taxes?
Well, the taxes, yes, the taxes go to the government to fund programs like building highways, et cetera, and stimulating the economy. But what happens when you have industry manufacturing, let's say shoes, and nobody has, and you have a slave labor force and then nobody has any money? What happens to all those shoes? Jason.
Couldn't it be
Marissa,
since
go ahead, Jason.
they're in the Americas, it's kind of easier for them to ship it back to Europe and sell it to people who are a lot wealthier over there? And here you can kind of pay someone of a lower wage compared to someone in Europe.
Right, but the key thing is selling and wages. All right, and write this down. Slaves don't buy anything. So if you're trying to get an economy and manufacturing shirts and hats and sunglasses and computers, I mean, not then, you need a group that's earning money so that they can take the money and buy the product coming out of industry. If you have, and Hamilton argued this, if you have an economy based on slavery, then nobody's got any money to buy all these products coming out of industry. So you have all of these factories and you have all this industry, but no one to buy the goods. You have to have wages to develop an economy of manufacturing. You have to, people have to have money in their pocket for you to develop banking. You can't develop a whole economy of banking on slavery. Slaves don't go to the bank. They have no money. They're being tortured and whipped and they're just dying and they're working in the fields. But if you create an economy without slavery, with wage earners, then you have consumers. And the key in this is to answer the why is that you need consumers. You have to develop a consumer society. That is why this current Biden plan is sending money to everybody, sending $1,400 to everybody so that you can go out and buy stuff. And that stimulates capitalism. That stimulates the economy. Now, who doesn't understand what I'm saying or who wants to ask me questions about it? Because it's at the heart. It's at the heart of Hamilton's plan. Carmela.
I'm okay. So the consumer thing makes sense. Where you said that that's why they send you money so that you can get the economy going. If the economy is based on slaves, aren't there owners of the slaves then? Or are you talking about the slaves as in like, oh, we trade labor for goods kind of thing?
All right, so tell me about the owners of the slaves. What's on, tell me the way your mind is going on that.
I mean, I don't really, I'm kind of like catching up, but if it's like slave owners that like own the slaves, I would assume they have money, like enough money to buy things, right? But I suppose if it's based on slave owning, right, like there's only a certain amount of slave owners. So it's like they can't really get the economy going, could they? So is that why it doesn't really work out that way?
Give me a little bit more of your thoughts. You're hot. You're on the right thing. You're on the right track. Just give me one more sentence.
I don't know. So if there's more, instead of the slaves not spending money and then people owning the slaves, if there was just like people spending money, there would be a better economy instead of just rich people who own people and then people who can't spend money, right?
And give me a little bit under that word better in your sentence.
I guess like a more efficient economy, economy that, what's efficient? I don't know, like a.
Can I give you a word? Can I give you a word instead of efficient?
Yeah.
Expansive.
Okay.
Expansive.
Okay.
Expansive. And Narissa, what do I mean? What are we talking about here? What is Carmela talking about here? What am I talking about here? What's at the heart of what we're both saying?
Okay, so what you're saying is like the wages which they give to people would mean spending. And by going out and spending the money, the economy would essentially grow. And all of these businesses like banking, manufacturing would eventually expand.
And take this word expansive, because Carmela was raising a very good question. She said, well, these slave owners have money, you know, and then she started thinking about it and said, but she first used the word efficient, and I gave her the word expansive because that's what I do. I put in different words. So what makes it more expansive to move from a wage earning economy from a slave labor economy? What makes it more expansive? It's very simple here. Just take
because it would mean more people are spending rather than a handful of people.
All right. Those taking notes, you can quote Narissa on this. You can quote Carmela on this. Say it one more time. That last sentence, Narissa, you nailed it. You nailed it. Say it again.
It would be more expansive because more people would be spending rather than just a handful of people.
All right. Carmela, you get that? You get that detail? It's perfect. You listen. You don't buy a slave a new pair of shoes. You laugh, but you understand. That laughter means you understand what I'm saying, right?
Well, yeah. Well, I was thinking about like Django, like the movie Django.
Go ahead.
Where, I don't know. So when we were talking about like slaves and slave owners, like I think about that movie, Django, with like Jamie Foxx, and like how they don't really treat the slaves like it was during the time where like the slaves weren't like completely treated. They were starting to get freed, but also like they still weren't being treated as like people. So yeah, no, the slave owners would not buy them shoes.
Well, let's just say they bought him one pair of shoes, right? Because they want him to work, right?
Okay.
But they're not going to buy him another pair of shoes next week because there's a new style, or or you like that color, or it goes with this outfit. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, but they would do it for their families and they're themselves, right? But it's not enough. It's just not enough.
All right. I want you to say that again, and people can quote you, right?
Slave owners could buy goods for themselves and their families to increase the economy, but it is just not enough.
Underline that. Underline. Not enough. Perfect. You can't build capitalism on a slave labor economy because, I'm quoting Carmela, it's not enough. That's the key. It's not enough. Think about it. You got 100 slaves owned by a family of 6, right? So these 6 people have the money, but if you make the 100 slaves wage earners, now you got 100 people buying. You get it? And and now I'll go back and say, this was Hamilton's vision. It was his vision, and I want to emphasize this. It was his vision when most people were living on farms. He had this vision. He had this vision of the future. When if you looked around, 90% of people were living on farms. They weren't thinking about banks. They weren't thinking about manufacturing. They weren't thinking about labor other than their own labor. Hamilton had a vision of what the future should be. And write that down any way you want. And Thomas Jefferson hated this vision. Thomas Jefferson hated manufacturing. Thomas Jefferson hated banking. Thomas Jefferson had slaves. Thomas Jefferson had children, raped his slaves. Thomas Jefferson saw the future of the country as slave labor. And this starts a division, a split in the country that lasts to this day. Those seeing the future of the country as Hamilton would see it, as banking, manufacturing, labor force being paid for their wages, who support the growth of cities, who believe that city air gives you freedom, versus the Jeffersonians who see the future of the country as you work hard and build yourself up by your own bootstraps. You have your own soil, you till your own garden, you have slave labor, you're tied into your land. That is the beginning of a division, not just in New York, of the country that remains to this day. Who has an example of that? Who can see what I'm talking about, looking at your life, looking at politics, looking at New York today? Where's the example? Brian. You there?
Professor, where's the example for what again? Sorry, can you?
What's the example? Was that Brian?
No, it's me. It's Carmela. I was asking.
What I'm looking for is, what I'm saying here is that Hamilton has a vision. His vision is manufacturing, industry, banking, trade, wage labor, the development of cities. On the opposing side is Jefferson. Jefferson hates cities. He hates it. He hates banking.
Okay.
He's a slave owner.
Okay, I have a kind of a thing now. I mean, it's kind of like when there's like the presidential elections, right? Like, and they have one side is like, hey, I promise that we're going to do this, 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 and this. And then the other side is like, they can't promise that. Here's what I promise. Boom, 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 boom. And then they do the little debate thing, and they exchange what ideas they have for the country, and that helps the people choose their leader, I suppose.
All right, so given what Carmela just said, Saima, are you there? Saima?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, given what Carmela just said, when you look at the political parties today, is one of them more like Hamilton and the other more like Jefferson?
I guess, yeah, in a way.
All right, and which one in your mind is more like Hamilton and which one is more like Jefferson?
I don't know. Sorry, I'm fasting. My throat is like really dry.
All right, you be quiet, and I'll go to somebody else. Arbad.
Yeah, Professor, you were breaking off a little bit. Could you repeat the question?
All right. The question is, Carmela was taking my presentation on Hamilton and Jefferson, and she was saying that if you look at Hamilton, I was saying, and then she picked up on this, that Hamilton his vision of the future was industry, manufacturing, banking, cities, immigrant workers making a fair wage, and to get rid of a slave labor force so people could have money and be consumers. On the other hand, on the other side, meaning, there was Thomas Jefferson, who was a slave owner, who said, no, we want people to live on the land. We want rural America. We want people to own slaves. the future of this country is people being farmers, people owning land, people owning slave labor. And Jefferson hated cities. He hated, this idea of paying immigrants. He disliked banking. All right, so this is the two worlds that are coming up in the 1790s in New York. And I asked, well, do you see it today? Carmela said, yes, I see it in the political parties. I'm asking you, which parties represent Hamilton and which party represents Jefferson?
The one about banking and business and paying the immigrants, I would say that's the Democratic Party. And I would say the other one about owning slaves is the Republican Party. And there's like no offense to like whoever, if you're a Republican or Democrat, I'm just answering the question,
Yeah. No. And does it amaze you that that difference, which started in the 1790s, is still with us today? That what is, I mean, it's amazing.
I have something to say about that. The fact that there's like parallels to that like first instance of this, of Jefferson being like having his views and Hamilton having his views. It also kind of ties into how there's still the problem of like inequality to this day, and there still is parallels to the way that I guess the colored people are treated nowadays. But besides that, for the Hamilton and Jefferson thing being the Democratic and Republican Party, Trump and his Republican Party, like he has money and he's like, I don't want to tax the rich. We're not doing that. I'm the rich. Also, let's keep America how it is and get the immigrants out. But Biden or Democratic Party is like, no, we should be more open. We should let immigrants in. We should not keep them in camps and so forth, so on, whatever, right?
So in your mind, which party is continuing the tradition of Hamilton and which party is continuing the tradition of Jefferson?
I mean, Jefferson would be the Republican Party, no? And then Hamilton would be Democratic, because Hamilton sounds like he's for the people. And Jefferson sounds like he's for the people with the money, right?
Looks that way to me. What amazes me as a historian is to see that this comes out of New York. First of all, they're both in New York. They hate each other. They're both in Washington's cabinet, and that it's still true today. And all right, I'll say more about this later. But it comes to a head. The debate between these two comes to a head over a piece of legislation called the Assumption Act. You should write that down, the Assumption Act, because we'll be looking at that in one of the questions. And it's very simple. The legislation that Hamilton was pushing was that we as a country should assume the debt that the colonies got into to finance the American Revolution. Hamilton made a very strong argument. He said, look, we're now a federal government and we should assume the $80 million of debt from all the colonies because they financed the revolution, and we should pay off that debt. And it was called the Assumption Act. And this brought to a head the friction and the battle between Hamilton and Jefferson.
Professor.
Yes, Christian. Who is that? Christian?
Yes.
Yeah.
When I think about what we're talking about, the only word that comes to mind is capitalism.
Tell me more, because you're so right.
Because we're having a debate at this point where we have to choose what side we should stay on. We have Thomas Jefferson, who wants slavery. That way he could keep judging people.
Keep what?
Judging people, demanding them to do his work. But on the other hand, we have Hamilton, who's saying, We should give people their own rights. We should let people decide for their own. We should give slaves freedom of speech and let themselves and let them express themselves through because of all of this that's going on, the mistreating that they're going through, the way that slave owners are treating their families, and everything else that's going on around.
And let me add one detail. You're going to like this, Christian. You ready? Hamilton sets up a society, a group of people in New York for the emancipation of slavery. He sets it up in the 1790s and leads the fight to end slavery in New York State. I just wanted to add that detail to what you're saying. All right, does anybody have questions on the question I raised? Was what was Alexander Hamilton's vision for the economy before we take a break? Anybody have any questions for me, for Christian, for Narissa, for Carmela, for Abbas? Anybody have any questions? Anybody feel they couldn't answer that question? We all good?
Just one point. So what's the answer to the first question?
Uh-huh. Tiffany, you want to give it in your words how you would answer that first question?
I was thinking about like free enterprise and stuff. So my thought is that Hamilton was kind of the first person to propose a market economy.
Can you repeat that, please? Because you were breaking up.
I said that Hamilton was the first person to propose a market economy and free enterprise.
And Jefferson, Tiffany?
He sort of kind of wanted things to remain the same and rely on slave labor to maintain the disparity between the haves and the have-nots.
And the economy would be based on farming.
There would be no innovation.
Right. Okay, let's take a break. It's 10 minutes. It's 10 minutes to 2. Let's come back in 15 minutes at 5 after 2, and we'll see a video that summarizes everything we've been saying. See you in 15 minutes. What you like, Christian? You like the Bank of New York, right?
Yes.
What caught your eye on the Bank of New York?
It was the first bank that was opened.
Yeah. You know the Bank of New York still exists?
Really?
Yeah, the Bank of New York still exists. And you're gonna love this. Every bank gets a number when they trade in the federal, in the Federal Reserve System. Every bank has a number. Guess what Bank of New York's number is?
7.
1. I love it as much as you love it.
They put it as number 1 because it was the first bank that was opened.
You got it. It's the first bank. It's created by Hamilton. It still exists. I think they call it now Bank of New York Mellon Bank or something like that. It still exists. And on the Federal Reserve trading system, it has the number 1 because I don't know how many people know this, but it was the first bank and Hamilton created it. I love that. So let's see. We have 1, 2, 1, 2,
We need 4 more.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We're waiting for two more. What'd you say?
Never mind.
All right. All right, Pedro. It struck you that Jefferson dies in debt?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I took history a lot. We talk about Jeffrey. I didn't know that about him, so that's something new.
Yeah, he dies in debt, in part because you never made money on slavery because slaves were rebelling every day. And he wasn't interested in business. He wasn't interested in banking. And he was busy raping the slave women and having babies. And there are a number of descendants of Jefferson in the Black community because he had slaves and he wasn't really that good of a businessman. But yet, think about it in terms of all the history books you've read, how Jefferson is so applauded, right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Saima, you're interested in Jefferson. What do you say? Jefferson assisted the capital view to a rural area. Tell me more about why that interested you, Saima.
Because I mean, I feel like in general, cities are always more powerful and there's always more opportunities in urban cities regardless. So it was just very like, what made him think that a rural town would be like better than New York City? I just want to know why.
I don't know why. I'm going to tell you why in a minute, but think about this. If you looked at the capitals of every state in the United States, they're all in rural areas. Think about this. Where is the capital of New York State? It's not New York City or Buffalo. It's Albany. Think about any capital of any state in the Union. Saima, you think about this, and then they're never in cities.
Yeah, true. I actually didn't even think about that.
All right, so hold on to that thought. This is purely Jefferson's influence. And the reason for it is that Jefferson truly believed that cities were evil. And that if you had government in cities, this would influence the politicians and make them evil. And so he really believed that the evilness of cities would get into government. And so what you should do is move government to rural areas where somehow the atmosphere, the trees, the birds, all this stuff in rural areas would influence government. Do you get it?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, and so just run it down, Google it. Any capital of any of the states. I mean, why isn't Philadelphia the capital of Pennsylvania? Why? I mean, think about it. You go anywhere in any state, they put the capitals all in these rural areas. That's totally Jefferson. That's totally Jefferson's influence. All right, Arbaz, New York having the most debt out of all the respecting colonies from the Revolution War is interesting. Why do you find that interesting, Arbaz, before I give you the background on it?
I mean, I understand how we spoke about before about the battle that took place in New York. So I understand from that perspective, maybe because the city was demolished and they took a lot of hits. So maybe that's why the debt was so high. I also wanted to point out the significance of Jefferson believing in the rural compared to Hamilton, who believed in the banking. When you think about the fact that he lived on 57 Wall Street, he did all that banking stuff, and you look at Wall Street now, it's like the mecca of business, finance, banking, all that. That's probably the beginning. It's probably the reason why it's so prolific now.
Write that down. Arbaz, write that down, and others should write down what Arbaz just said and quote him. Give me that sentence again because it's brilliant. It's brilliant. Give it again, Arbaz.
Sure. The significance of Hamilton living on 57 Wall Street, creating the bank. What is the specific name of the bank again? I forgot.
Christian, what's the bank?
Bank of New York.
Yeah, creating the Bank of New York and his beliefs in the business, finance, and banking systems is what led Wall Street to be the mecca of finance within the U.S. I would say something like that. Yeah.
That's great. And would you agree with this, that the United States is the mecca of finance for the world?
Currently, yes, I agree.
Nicely put. Nicely put. Currently, yes. And so, would you agree with this, that we're living in a Hamiltonian world?
100%. Yep. I never realized it until this video. So thank you.
It's amazing, right? It's chilling. It's chilling. And New York has most of the debt. Do you know why?
Was it because of all the the first battle that took place and the fact that it was left in ruins? Does that?
No, I actually think the video's got it wrong. The guy is Patrick Moynihan, famous senator from New York, who says, and of course it had all this debt because the most important battles were here. It's totally not true. The most important battles weren't here. Washington spent most of his time getting out of New York. There were no battles here at all. I mean, it was crucial in terms of the decision Washington made to get out of Brooklyn and to get out of town to save the army. The reason why New York has so much debt is because New York speculators, New York risk takers, New York people with money went around and bought up the debt in all of the other states. They went to South Carolina, they went to Georgia, they went to North Carolina, they went to all the other states and bought up the paper, the debt paper. So if let's say South Carolina was raising some money for the revolution, right? And they went to you, Armaz, and they said, oh, we need money. And you said, okay, I'll give you $100. And they would give you I'm making this up, but just to make it simple. And they give you a piece of paper that said, the colony of South Carolina owes you $100, right? It would be a piece of paper that they'd say, we'll pay you, all right? War's over, they have no money, and New York speculators go to these various places and say, look, you got this piece of paper. It says $100 from the colony of South Carolina or North Carolina. You're not going to get that money. So we'll give you 10 cents on the dollar. So sell us that $100 piece of paper for $10 and we'll give you $10. And New York speculators, New York risk takers went all around buying up the debt. And they did it because they believed Hamilton's vision would win. They would become a strong central government and the federal government would make good on that debt. You got it?
That's crazy, yeah.
That's crazy. That is crazy. And that's why New York had all the debt, because New York risk takers went around and bought up the debt on 10 cents on a dollar because they kind of knew that Hamilton's vision, they were betting that Hamilton's vision would take place, that we'd have a strong federal government, and that the federal government, you know, the federal government would back up that paper. And that's why New Yorkers had all that debt. We'll get into more of it later, but it's one of my favorite things. So thanks for bringing it up. So who's next? Carmela, June 20th.
Yeah.
Why did you pick June 20th? When does the video say, what does the video say about June 20th?
At the end, when they talked about, I think they went to go see Jefferson or something at his
Oh, June 20th, 1790.
Yeah, 1790.
Oh, Carmela, you're gonna love this. You're gonna love you're gonna absolutely dine out on this. You ready for this?
Yeah, I'm ready.
You know the show Hamilton?
Okay, so my like the Broadway show, right?
Yeah.
My dad and stepmom who live in New York, and that's who I lived with over there. They're obsessed with Hamilton. Like they will listen to the soundtrack every day. They'll try and make me watch it, but I've never actually watched it myself.
So what I'm about to tell you, you're gonna just flip out. You ready for this? There's a song in Hamilton called "The Room Where It Happened."
Okay.
We're gonna get into later, and I think sent you a link to it. And your mom and your stepdad know this song, right? You ready for this?
Yeah.
That's one of the most famous songs. Who was it telling me? Was it Tiffany, was it you that you know that song, right? Somebody, well, Tiffany, did you were the one who said you knew that song, or you listened to the soundtrack?
Yeah, I listened to the song.
All right, so that song, and Carmela, you're gonna, oh, now this is gonna be your favorite song. That song, The Room Where It Happened, is about this meeting that you referred to of Jefferson and Madison on June 20th, 1790.
Wait, a meeting, a battle?
What?
Wait, repeat. Sorry.
You're gonna love this. This meeting at the end of the video, when they say Jefferson and Madison get together on to have a meeting on June 20th, 1790.
Yeah.
All right. The song in Hamilton is a song called The Room Where It Happened.
And that's June 20th.
1790. So you,
I love this.
all right, you have to Google it on YouTube. I think
I mean, I'm gonna watch the whole thing. I have Disney Plus, so I'll watch it for this class.
No need to watch the whole thing. I mean, you can watch the whole thing. It's actually great, but you definitely have to watch The Room Where It Happened, because it takes place on your birthday. I mean, you were born in 1790, but it takes place on June 20th, and you got to let your mom and your stepdad know this, all right?
Okay.
And you got to write to me and tell me their reaction.
Okay.
All right? It's very exciting. Very exciting. All right, who's next? Where were we? We did Arbaz, we did Carmela. Louis, the southern states were really opposed to any of the Hamilton plans. And, Louis, you know why they were opposed to Hamilton's plans?
Because it's focusing more towards the city.
Not towards like, and it was again, what's that?
Like most of his plans, they were focusing on like the cities, not to the countryside.
Right, and also it didn't support slavery. It didn't support agriculture, right? It was mostly supporting a wage earning group, manufacturing, banking. So you could see why the Southerners were against this, right?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to tell you something which you're going to find hard to believe. This is the beginnings of the Civil War. I'll say it again for those of you who are taking notes. Right here, what we have our fingers on, right here, this difference that Lewis just pointed out, that the Southern states were really opposed to any of Hamilton's plans. Just you can quote Lewis when you do your writing. This is the beginnings of the Civil War. Lewis, you want to give us another sense of why I'm saying that?
Because like Hamilton's plans, it was focusing more towards the cities instead of the countryside. Like it didn't support slavery. It didn't support agriculture. It was more towards like manufacturing and industrialization.
Right. And so the word I put into this is, and it was supporting the North. The North became identified with this, right? And you say the Southern states were really opposed to it. You're right. And who was in favor of this? The North. You see how this, Louis, you see how this leads to the Civil War?
Yeah.
Go ahead, give me the last sentence. Give me one more sentence. Why? Why does this lead to the Civil War?
Because this is the start when the northern states they're known for like not having slavery and more towards like industrialization than agriculture.
Right, and so why would this division lead to a civil war in your mind? There's no right answer here. I just want to get into your mind. What thoughts are coming in your mind?
Well, because like in the future, like any laws that are focused more towards like the North, the South is going to dislike it because they feel like their rights, they're not getting protected.
Perfect. Write it down. It just leads to differences on all legislation because, and this is my words, you can't have a country with two different economies. It can't be that you have this northern wage earning Hamiltonian manufactured banking economy and a southern slave labor agricultural economy existing under one flag. They can't go on for too long. And what Louis just said is so important because it influences all legislation. And we'll get to that, Louis, as an example with the Assumption Act. But let me get to Tiffany. Jefferson believed that America's success lay in the agricultural tradition when Hamilton distrusted popular will and believed that federal government should wield considerable power. Tiffany, tell me more about this difference you see between Hamilton and Jefferson in terms of the future, how they, yeah.
I think that Jefferson wanted to continue with agriculture being like the main source of labor because he feared that if people relied on industrialization and like a market economy, that they would no longer assume responsibility to be able to sustain themselves. Whereas I think Hamilton saw more of like, I guess in a way he felt that people shouldn't necessarily have to sustain themselves, and industrialization and manufacturing would provide people with the goods and services and they could pay for it as opposed to having to farm and tend to their own land to provide for themselves.
Excellent. But I'm going to push you a little bit. You use a phrase here, Hamilton distrusted popular will and believed that federal government should wield considerable power. I love that. Tell me more about what you're saying there.
Popular will meaning like that the people knew what was best for themselves, I guess, in a sense.
Say that again?
That the people didn't know what would be good for themselves.
Exactly. I mean, here was a guy who was against slavery, was supporting wage earning, but didn't really trust the popular will. And today we live with that tradition in the US Senate. Anybody know what I'm talking about? That we have the House of Representatives, which is based on population, and then we have the US Senate. How does the US Senate reflect Hamilton's distrust of the popular will?
Don't they
Isn't it because they have unlimited like years that they can stay in the house? Like it's not really regulated. Like you can stay as long as you want.
But what about this distrust of popular will that Tiffany's talking about? How does the US Senate show us that in our government there's a distrust of the popular will, where the House of Representatives, which is based on population, doesn't say that. I mean, the House of Representatives is based on population, so there's a faith in the popular will. But the US Senate is different. And how does that reveal what Tiffany's picking up here? How does that reveal Hamilton's distrust? Anybody want to jump into that before I say more? Tiffany, you want to try it?
Doesn't the Senate give power to the national government?
Right, and here's the key. No matter how many people in your state, you still get 2 senators. So it's not based on popular will. New York has 2, Maine has 2, everybody has 2. And it reflects in some ways a movement away from popular will, where the House of Representatives is more, okay, let's just give you as many people in the House as in your state. The Senate is more reflecting what you're talking about, Tiffany, a kind of distrust of popular will and saying you're going to get 2 no matter how many people you have. All right, Dave, what's that?
It also depends on the electoral votes.
Yes, Christian. You're so good. The whole electoral college comes out of this distrust of the popular will. The electoral college that elects the president. We think we elect the president. but actually we are electing electors who then go and elect a president. And so, Christian, bravo, bravo. It's a detail, it's an example of what Tiffany's getting at. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right.
You're welcome.
Daisy, it was necessary to stabilize and improve the national credit. Tell me more, Daisy. What are you getting at there? Daisy, are you with us?
Basically, is that I really don't know how to word it, honestly. It's just like you're trying to like kind of make better resources and like have more people buy stuff, but at the same time it doesn't equal out, and like you're trying to make the country better.
Right. And basically what I think you're saying here is you're trying to create more of a national feeling rather than a state feeling. Like there's a respect for the national government, there's a respect for centralized government. Am I putting words into your mouth, or am I good?
I think you're good. I mean, I kind of miss the point a little bit, but I don't know.
All right, but let me give you one thought. Hamilton really did believe in a strong national government. He really didn't believe in states having the power. And so what I think you're getting at under Hamilton is you improve the national credit, and that improves the strength of the national government. And I'll leave you with that. Luis, let's see. Why did they refuse for a national bank again? Tell me more what you're thinking there.
Well, I think it got like answered already because
Okay.
like the states, they didn't want the central government to have too much like power.
Right. Okay. So now, Daisy, you're back with another one. Isn't that bank in? Yes. So you know the Bank of New York, Daisy?
Somewhat. I remember someone bringing it up in middle school.
Yeah, it's still there, and it still exists. And you can Google it and see all the places that it exists. The Bank of New York. Sometimes it's BNY Mellon, but you can see it's still there. Great. Okay, Narissa, the banking industry started off with Hamilton. You want to say a little bit more about that?
Yes, Professor. I just found it interesting that the banking industry initially started off with Hamilton, and to this day, it's still one of the major industries that's like driving New York City's economy's growth. I found that interesting.
And Narissa, I'm going to push you a little bit. What is the role of banking in driving manufacturing, industry, businesses? What is the role of banking? Why do you need banking? Why did Hamilton believe you need banking? Why do you believe you need banking? Why does anybody in business believe they need banking?
I think it like offers people a service, and it offers them a service for if they want to save their money as opposed to spending it.
And what if a business wants to spend money? What role does the bank play in that?
It offers them the support.
Give me another word.
Yes, it gives them like the investment. It gives business the investment to invest elsewhere.
Perfect. It gives them the investment, because at the heart of capitalism is growth. And so when you're in business, I'm going to make this number up, and you made $100 this year. In capitalism, if you make $100 next year, that's not good. You got to make $200 next year. So the measure in capitalism is the growth rate of your business. And so you're constantly pushing your business beyond the current ability. And to do that, you need banks. You need to borrow on the risk that you're going to do better and that your business is going to grow. But you turn to the banks to invest in your business, get a loan, so that you can expand. And expansion's the key word here. Expansion was the key word when Carmela was talking about slaves and slave labor. It's an expansion. It's capitalism has everything to do with expansion. It's not good enough to repeat what you did this year. You've got to be better. You've got to make more money. You've got to expand your business. To do that, you need banks. And Hamilton understood that. Okay, how'd I do? Narissa, you get it?
Yes, I get it.
Okay, okay. Jason, New York was growing so fast, the neighboring society found it as a threat, and I found that very interesting. Jason, tell me more about New York growing so fast, and who was the neighboring society you're referring to?
So the South was like, I guess, getting jealous because New York was growing financially really fast because they changed their ways from a slave market to more of a like a business type thing where they don't like slaves, they rather pay people to boost the economy. And that really worried the South. And yeah.
It, and it worried him so much, it led to a civil war.
Yeah, it's just crazy how all that just because they didn't want slaves no more. So, and I find that interesting because it's like they just didn't agree on an idea, and it's slavery, and that all caused the Civil War.
Say it again, say it again, say it again. I want to hear that again.
They didn't agree on a certain idea, and it was slavery, and that was the cause of a war.
And why do you think, I'm pushing you now to get inside your own intellect, why do you think they didn't agree? There's no right answer to this. I want to really push you into your own intellect.
I forgot his name. Who was the person that represented the South again?
Jefferson.
Jefferson. So Jefferson owned many slaves, and like you said, he would do many bad things to them. So I'm guessing like he didn't want, he wanted to keep that power, you know, he wanted to keep the power he had. So he didn't want to like let it go. And if slaves were gone, all that power is gone too.
You better write that down. It's brilliant, and you won't remember it. It's smart, 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 Jason. Smart, smart, smart. Exactly. It's about power. And don't let anybody tell you any difference. And let me push it a little bit more. Do you see that today in the world around you? Do you see that still around us, that it's really about power?
Yeah. So I would say like I I'm from what I know, most of the government is made out of white individuals. And I feel like it's not like cultural enough, you know, like there's not that many perspectives besides a certain group. And I feel like that's the way like it led on to now.
You got it. You got it. The history of great white men, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Let me tell you, when I first started teaching at LaGuardia in 1972, and I started teaching this kind of history, oh my God, people were so mad at me. You're not teaching real history. This isn't real American history. Oh, you wouldn't imagine what I heard from teaching this kind of history. But I'm telling you, we're learning the real stuff. This is the real stuff. And it's real because you see it playing itself out to this day. To this day. Sarkar, tell us, thank you, Jason. Sarkar, maybe Jefferson wanted manipulate slaves' business. Tell me more. What are you thinking there?
I think the 17th century, most of the menial job slaves did. Okay, so I think if the slave remove or extend from the society, and there will be a crisis of this menial job like farming and other activities. So that's why maybe he did not support to free slaves, or he want to manipulate this business.
All right, let me push you a little bit, Sarkar. How do you think a guy like Jefferson justified this attitude to himself? How could, I mean, I'm pushing you. How could a guy like Jefferson, right? Smart guy, well-read, well-educated. How could he justify this to himself? Any Sarkar guesses on this? And I'm pushing you on the why. There's no right answer here, but I want to get inside of your head a little bit. How did he do it? How did he justify this to himself? What do you think?
maybe it's become for racism because most of the black was African, and if they get the equal.
Yeah, one more sentence.
And if the black are become free, and so it's going to be conflict between white and blacks.
All right, and let me give you the clinching sentence to what you said, because I love what you said. Because I'll try to say this without being emotional. Because to Thomas Jefferson, black lives did not matter. And that was the justification. You get it?
Yeah.
It's powerful what I just said.
Professor,
I'm listening, Christian.
I have a question.
I'm ready for your question.
Is this the time of period where they had to deal with the 3/5?
The 3/5 compromise, it's later. The 3/5 compromise is another 60 years, but you're on the right track, which is what Sarkar was getting at, which is this discussion about the future of slavery. Actually, the 3/5 compromise is not, sorry. It's in the Constitution, actually. So it's not, it is the same time period. You're right. Got it mixed up. Exactly right. It's in the writing of the Constitution, which is basically when we count the number of people in your state, how many of those people will determine the number of people in Congress and the House of Representatives. And it was decided that slaves would be counted as 3/5 of a person. So you're absolutely right. It's the same time period.
Which means that every 3 people out of 5 would count as 1 vote.
Right.
Professor, I have a question.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Right now, on the law now the law of our American Constitution, that every man is equal. Then we have no scope to racism any person. So in spite of those, when we fill up any job application, we can see the option that where I am from, I am African, I am Asian, or I am American, I am Latino. So why this dividing?
Why is what?
So why this? So why they ask for racism when we fill up the job application?
Great question. Why are they asking these very personal questions? Am I saying it right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think?
I don't know.
You don't know. This pushes me to the why. You're pushing me now on the why question about why are we all of a sudden this so interested in these personal questions about your past. And I would say, others can jump in, that we're interested in this because we want to really document discrimination. I think there's a push in this country right now that we want to really get the facts. We want to really get the detail about which schools are not getting money because they have a high percentage of people of color, about which areas are being underfunded for healthcare because they have a high percentage of people of color. I mean, you asked me a why question, so I'm giving you the Lieberman answer. I'm not saying I'm right or I'm wrong. I'm just giving you my answer. But I think we're living in a time where there's really an attempt to document discrimination. And that's my answer. What do you think?
Maybe.
Maybe. Okay. Thank you.
At the first time, I think they also maybe they also calculate, or they also find out the people who are Asian, who are American.
So your why is that they're going to use it to do evil.
Professor, I have a question. So when, in terms of Jefferson versus Hamilton, we're talking about Thomas Jefferson?
Yes.
Okay, so what I was taught in school growing up is that he was against slavery. So I guess I'm kind of confused as to like was that ever true, or was that just like a political angle that he played to become president?
I don't know who told you this, but how could you justify the interpretation of Thomas Jefferson being against slavery when he was one of the largest slaveholders in Virginia? I don't get it. I don't know who told you this. I don't know where they got it from, but just on the basic facts, for someone to say, I'm against slavery and yet be a slaveholder, it makes no sense to me. I'm going to say, yes, there are people then, now, and in the future invested in glorifying Jefferson. He's on our currency. He's hailed as a great president. And he did do great things. But in this area, I would say that Thomas Jefferson was a slaveholder. And in this area, for this time period, I'm not talking about the future, I think ultimately Jefferson probably did regret being a slaveholder, but that was after this. So if I'm going to defend the person who told you that or taught you that, they're talking about a Jefferson not in this time period. You get what I'm going?
Yeah, so did he change, or was it like, because I never learned about this particular, like this person that he was, which
Yeah.
if you ask me, once a person is racist and owns slaves, it's not something that they could really change in a sense. I don't know if that makes sense. So I don't know. I was just kind of surprised because, like, even if you just do a quick Google search on him, like, it talks about how he spoke about slavery as being like unnatural to nature and stuff. So it's very contradictory to what I learned today. So I just wanted to like clarify that.
Well, the clarification is that we have an investment in this country to glorify Thomas Jefferson and to pick out things he said about slavery and salute it. And it's not to say that Jefferson evolved into a different person. It's not to say that Jefferson had some doubts about his beliefs. I think every slaveholder had doubts about their beliefs, but in reality, they justified. I mean, how could you be a religious person and own slaves? How could you believe in equality and say that Black people are only 3/5 of a person? And if you just look at the reality of the world that Jefferson lived in, you have to come up with the conclusion that Jefferson felt that the slave labor force was okay. Now, eventually, does he then decide he was wrong? I'd have to Google it myself. But for right now, for this time period, for what we're talking about, Thomas Jefferson had slaves, supported slavery, was busy raping the slave women. And when you Google it, I think there are two things that probably happen. I'll have to Google it myself. One is that Jefferson evolves into, as many of them did, and evolves into taking the position that slavery was evil and was bad, and evolves into some regret. But I'd have to check that. But for this time period, for right now, for what we're talking about, nobody could convince me that Jefferson was not pro-slavery. Did he have doubts? They all had doubts. How could you not have doubts if you were a religious person? How could you not have doubts if you believed in equality? Of course, there was doubts, but I think they justified it by and this is my, now that you're hearing RKL, they justified it by saying Black lives didn't matter, or didn't matter as much as whites, that Blacks were property and less than human. But that's my interpretation. How'd I do?
Good. I just think it makes it difficult for me to trust history when there's so many opinions that are put into a lot of historical events that took place.
Good for you.
It doesn't come from a subjective place a lot of times. So that's why I keep a a skepticism a lot of times when I read things. I don't just take it for
Well, I mean, isn't
what it
history
is.
just like a long game of telephone?
Carmela, what'd you say?
I said, I mean, she's right, because isn't history just kind of like a long game of telephone? Like a really, really long game of telephone. Do you know what that is?
Yeah, I know what telephone is. I grew up in Brooklyn.
Yeah. So I feel like you're right to question it. But I mean, that's what's so interesting about it, is the questioning it part, you know? It's like, did this stuff really happen? How did it happen? Why did it happen? And I mean, yeah, everybody can really just analyze it how they want to, but in the end, I feel like the only people that ultimately really know what happened are the people that experienced it.
Well, let me end the class with two things. With using Carmela's reference to telephone, in the game of history, using telephone as the metaphor, as you know the game, the last person at the end of the telephone tells the story, right? And then everybody laughs and how it changed, right? That's what happens. The first person says, the dog bit this guy, and the last person says, oh, the story was the guy bit the dog, or something, you know. Everybody finds it very funny, right? For those of you who don't know the game of telephone. So Carmela, Tiffany, and everybody else, in history, it's always been that the last person in the game of telephone has always been a white male. You get where I'm going here?
Yeah.
In the game of telephone, and talking about this skepticism that Tiffany has, it's always been that those who wrote history, that those who taught history classes, that those who interpreted the past were always white guys. And that influences the final story. So the skepticism is important. And getting back to, who was it who got the speeding ticket?
Me or Baz?
Arbaz, okay. Arbaz, you started off the class saying what Tiffany's saying, right? That you had some skepticism about even the way you were reporting this and the way the police would report it, right? That they, didn't you end by, when I pushed you on why it happened? Why it happened. What's that? When I pushed you about. I'm getting. Somebody has their. Oleg, can you mute everybody for a minute? Hello? Is everybody muted? All right.
Professor, you're muted.
We can't hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I'm saying that Arbaz, when you were telling the story, feeding into what Tiffany's saying, that you also were concerned about the interpretation, right? About why you got the ticket.
Yeah, yep. It pretty much segued into our whole class, which was kind of nice in a way. And yeah, I mean, they say the quote, right? History is written by the victors, but the victors were all white men. So, I mean, yeah, they pretty much wrote the story. So
they wrote the story. They wrote the story. And there is a song in Hamilton called Who's Gonna Write My Story? You should all listen to that song. It's great. Okay, great fun class. Love working with you all. I'll see you on Thursday.